we would learn as part of this session is, okay, what is text classification itself, where and all can we apply it, its general applicability, and how to build a simple text classifier using the Python code. So, okay, this is like more targeted to people who are like, trying to get into it and trying to understand machine learning. So probably some of the more advanced people might find, okay, something is repetitive. But I would try to bring out this, as part of the session also, some of the experiences we faced while building a text classifier for our company actually. So having set the objectives right, so let's just dive into the use cases actually. So I'm just telling, like, there are people in your organization and different people face different problems. So this is one particular use case. Somebody might say, okay, I'm unable to print my document. Another person might say, okay, my restroom is unclean, I need to clean that restroom. And the third person might say, my salary is not credited. So what do all these things have in common? All these things have in common is people are having issues and they want to raise these issues to the relevant people in the system who could solve it for them. So prior to what we did was, like, we used to have this huge portal where people have to go figure out, okay, where in that huge menu drop-down list their problem could be resolved actually. So they had to go, probably they go to facilities, see, maybe somewhere under facilities there is a drop-down box which would say, okay, this is the right category, and then they will say, okay, they will associate themselves, raise the ticket against that, and usually almost we saw that 40% of the cases they were raising it in the wrong bucket. So what is happening is this was leading a lot of frustration both from the agent's perspective as well as from the user, because the user was facing an issue because he raised his issue and then he's getting no resolution. He's waiting days, 1 day, 2 days, maybe even weeks. And the whole problem is it's actually raised in the wrong bucket, so there's nothing wrong with the agent because the agent doesn't have no clue what to do with it. So how will a facilities person know what to do with probably a printer ticket? He has no clue actually. So, or similarly, how can an IMG person or an infra person know something about your salary? But this was what was happening actually, and it was leading to a lot of frustration and a lot of rework. So there was like huge effort, just in reassigning tickets, where ticket used to go to land to one agent and get assigned to another agent, and almost 3 or 4 hops before it finally reached the right person and it got resolved. So these are the kind of use case, and how do you ensure that the right person would handle your ticket actually, and how do you make it seamless for the end user? This could be one possible use case for our classifier. So what are we trying to do? We are saying that, okay, can we automatically classify and categorize a ticket, which is expressed in the natural language? So as I said, the one problem which we already saw was, these different issues. Can we actually put it to the right bucket? How do you see only what you want? So for example, there are a lot of news articles in the world actually, and so much news is getting generated. How do I go to the right news article which only interests me? So probably, I'm an hockey enthusiast and I want to see only hockey related news. But I'm totally irritated because I need to go search probably through politics and maybe within in that or maybe even within sports there are so many categories, but before I reach my hockey thing I'm like pretty frustrated. So can I actually filter all this so that I see only news which is interesting or relevant to me? So this is the couple of use cases, and there are like there are n number of things. So anywhere where there is text, where there is unstructured text, and there is a need to put these texts in the right category, this classification has an applicability. So this could even be in buying products, wherein the end user could actually state his problem that I am interested in a blue, maybe a blue pant or a blue shoe, and probably it had these specifications. And you could actually use this technique to go and categorize it and say, okay, this is the shoe you're looking for, and suggest it to him. Okay, so now that we have set the context right, that we know what we want, what are the prerequisites to build such a system? So one of the main prerequisites to build a system is you need to have a historical label data, because the entire classification is based on the premise that, okay, there is a lot of historical text and these texts are tagged to the right categories. Of course, we have a lot of caveats in real life which we will talk about down the line, but basic assumption is you have a lot of text which is pre-categorized. So for example, whatever issues I said, I need to have all those issues which are rightly categorized. So I could have hundreds of printer tickets or hundreds of salary payroll issues all tagged to the right class, and I could actually take that and learn from that. So and then if I want to go and experiment and not in the thing but for my own interest, and there are some corpora available with people like anybody who has interest can go and download. For example, the 20 news group is one such data, and there are lots of such data. So this is 20 news groups data which you all could actually search on it, and then this data is available for anybody to download and play around with actually. So this is the historical data wherein the news items are correctly tagged to different categories, and you all could use this for the learning purpose. So now that we have seen that, okay, what is our use case and what are the prerequisites, and we have that prerequisite ready. So I'm just giving a very high level solution block diagram wherein what does it take to build such a system. So if you see at the bottom line, there is two steps to this. One is the training and then is the actual prediction. If you see in the training, basically, you get the training data, which is your historical corpus, and you'll send it through a lot of pre-processing. And now we'll go deep dive into these blocks, what each of that does down the line. And then once we finish pre-processing, we would actually build the model, the machine learning model. And once the model, the trained model is there, you put it in the store. What happens is in the live, when your text comes, real categorization, you again go and do some sort of NLP pre-processing on that, and then take the trained model and predict using that model on that particular text, and you would get the output response. So at a very high, simple level, this is all it takes to build a classification system actually. So you have a training, and then you have a prediction, and you have a trained model and pre-processing. So now we're going to something specific. Of course, there is no limitation that it has to be done in Python. It could be done in Java or any other language. There are so many wonderful languages available and wonderful machine learning packages available. I just took the example of Python, where there is one library which is scikit-learn, which is very excellent and very user friendly. So anybody could whose interest could actually go and dig further in it. And this could actually be automatically it could be downloaded from that particular link actually. So now we come to the actual thing like. So we in the ideal world, actually we are saying, okay, there's a lot of historical data available, and it is nice, we can use it for building our classifiers, but in real life it's not so. There is a lot of data related challenges which we face. Of course, we cannot go into each of them how they can be handled, but I can at least touch upon what kind of issues we faced and how do we try to solve it at a high level. So if you see, I could actually label it into 4 major categories. One is that the data itself is unclean. When I say data is unclean, it has a lot of irrelevant text actually. It could be as in problem tickets, it could have people's names. It could actually mention irrelevant data. It could have telephone numbers. A lot of things which are actually doesn't make any sense to the actual categorization itself. The second challenge is the wrongly labeled data, wherein you have a lot of these categories, tickets or instance data which are wrongly classified. So if this is a significant %, then the machine learning model also will learn it in the wrong way. So basically, probably if a printer ticket is tagged as a payroll, and there is a significant number of tickets like which are in that category, then you could actually start predicting printer tickets as payroll in live use. So this is another major problem. Unbalanced data, it's a huge issue wherein in our case I could say that we had I think 3,000 plus categories, and if you see the tail categories, the categories which had less than maybe 10 tickets, there were I think more than maybe 1,500 of them. So these categories had just 5, or maybe there were categories with just 1 ticket, just 1 training data. So how do you actually try to work in this kind of environment, which is very difficult, like wherein the categories with more data would totally swam down the categories with less data, and it will never be predicted. So this is a major issue. And then you have, of course, the large number of classes, wherein there are a lot of classes, and if you see in your real data, many of them are very close to each other, and it doesn't make sense to have 2 categories. It could be just a matter of maybe somebody actually did not know a pre-existing category and he created one more. So there could be actually 2 categories for the same thing, or 2 categories for very similar things. So that unnecessarily bloats up your classes, and how do we handle that actually? So these are some of the data related challenges which we faced. Okay, so how do we think, again this is an entire topic on its own, so I'm not doing good justice, but I'll just touch upon some of the things is what could we do actually. Eliminate less informative records. So how do you figure out that certain data sets, like probably through some clustering techniques, you figure out that there are outliers in your data and they don't make sense actually. Actually they don't add any information, and these are just junk records. So you actually remove those less informative records. The second is active learning, which is a very good thing, wherein if you could actually get few clean text, few clean data for each of your classes, then you actually build the initial model using those few clean data and use a thing like active learning, which maybe you use a k nearest neighbor, and go through all your other data and slowly add the other tickets or other instances into your initial corpus. So this is a very good technique wherein if you actually have a very clean data for a few for the initial number of classes, then you could actually keep on building it in a manner through the active learning approach. Random oversampling, so this is for handling your classes with less data. So probably what we could try is that we could actually use the classes with less tickets, just try to duplicate those in a random manner. Of course this did not work for us, but probably it is one of the suggested techniques, but this did not work for us. But you could still try this where you randomly oversample classes with less tickets, you oversample the data and get more number of data for that. and merging similar classes. So how do you find out that you can actually, apply some sort of similarity algorithms to see how similar two classes are, and then if two classes are very similar, probably you can merge. So in fact, we have seen cases like, for a particular, I could give an example, is that for facilities, there were like some 27 classes, and after running this, we figured out actually there were only 7 which were required. And then, in fact, when we went back to the domain team and showed them, they said, yes, I don't know why these other, categories are there. So this is a very good thing wherein you could merge and remove the less, this very similar classes. So now that we have handled the data and, everything is good, we have good data, we could actually start the actual ingestion process, actual building. How do you ingest the data actually? So basically, for the ingesting the data, basically there are two things. One is that you need to understand what is your description, which is actually the instance, the text description, and what is the class or the label. So the first thing is you split your data so that you know that which is your description and which is the associated class. So which is the instance and instance label split. And then basically you actually do a train and test set split. So why this is required is that once you build your model, you also want to validate your model. So basically you could actually split your data such that maybe some 80-20 or 70-30, such that you keep 70% for the for your training and probably the 30% you test it and see how well your model is performing. So this is very the two things which you would do before ingesting the data. Then comes the actual, now the technical part is that now that you have actually split the data and got the thing, maybe it's got two good lists or two data points very clearly, the training and testing. You actually start the actual ingest, the learning process, and for that the first step is the vectorization, because all your algorithms actually work on the vector space, so you have to convert your data, which is actually your textual data, into a numerical or a vector representation, and we will actually talk about how that is done down the line. And of course data compression, because typically once you vectorize, and if you see all this unstructured text, it's usually very high dimensional and it's very sparse. So if you do a data compression, you could ensure that you only retain the most important, probably things which are less relevant, you could actually remove it actually. So how do you do the vectorization part? So there is something called, of course there are many things, but we are actually talking something about the term frequency, inverse document frequency. So what we do actually is that we convert your collection of documents, or you say your text, your tickets, to a matrix of TF-IDF features. So what this actually does is nothing but, assuming you have, say, many instances, at the end of it you would actually have something like, your samples would be your rows. So suppose each instance is a row. Suppose you have 1,000 instances or 1,000 training data, you'll have 1,000 rows, and your columns would be the terms in those rows. So probably, what are the keywords like which appear there? So it, it could be like printer, or out of paper, it could be maybe salary. So what are the key terms? Whatever it has learned will be your column, and in a row would be your each of your instance. And basically the value in that term frequency will actually actually bring out how important a particular term is actually. So this is a TF-IDF. Again, this is completely done automatically for us using, if you use most of the libraries, and if you see the specific library in Python, so you just use the TF-IDF vectorizer, and that itself actually has a lot of good things actually, wherein when you're doing the vectorization itself, you could actually say what are you interested in. For example, the n-gram range is very significant, because just to give an example, a big and a data, right, if it comes together, actually it has more relevance. So it's a 2 gram actually a big data. So similarly there could be trigrams, 5 grams. So you can actually specify while doing the vectorization itself that are you interested in multiple grams, and what is the range like? Is it like is it 1, or is it like maybe 1 to 2, 1 to 3? Maybe sometimes you're not even interested in unigrams. You're only saying that I will go for 2 to 5 or 3 to 4. So that is actually, you could actually specify what is the range based on your understanding of the data. So probably if your data, a bigram has more importance, right? You could actually just say 2, 2 to 2, or 2 to 3. I'm just interested in bigrams and trigrams. You just mentioned 2 to 3. So this is the n-gram range. The stop words basically very important is that lot of terms like like I, my, you, if, all these things appear many times in your corpus, and they typically would not add any weightage. So can we actually, if you actually mention stop words in English, there is a feature that it automatically removes stop words. So you don't have to do any additional pre-processing. If there is a requirement beyond this, you could always write your own stop word removal algorithm and remove your own domain specific stop words, but using this would automatically at least eliminate your English stop words. So you can also mention, of course, the list wherein you provide your list of stop words. So you can actually say, okay, use this list to remove the stop words actually. And lowercase, this is very important because if you do not mention this, then there could be something like a printer with a P caps and there's another printer with P bottom. If you don't convert everything to the similar case, the algorithm will infer these as two different tokens. So it is important that you convert everything to the same case actually. And of course, yeah, so these are some of the parameters when we actually use the TF-IDF vectorization. So, so as the output of this, you have a very nice list of matrix, a vector matrix, wherein as I said that each row is your instance, represents the instance, and every column represents the tokens in your vocabulary. Okay, so now we've actually come to the stage that okay, we have done the pre-processing, we have read, split the data into training and testing. We have also now read the data into your system actually, it's running in your program. So what do we do next actually? So this is now when you actually start building the classifier. So again, there are many classifiers, like you can actually use a lot actually. So in fact, as part of our work, we had to actually experiment almost more than 10 or 15 different classifiers. So what works for your data set best, right? So you will have to do a lot of, that's where the, your intuition and your, your testing and your iterations come in. But the good thing about at least the Python library is that, all the classifiers have almost similar form. So once you actually understand, only the parameters vary. So once you understand the specific parameters, you could use the similar form, wherein you actually, just initialize the classifier and fit the classifier basically. So basically you actually initialize the classifier and fit the classifier to the training, data. So this is one particular classifier which worked for us, so rich classifier. This was it worked for us from the text perspective after experimenting multiple things. And there are some specific things, of course, very specific to that thing, but I think that doesn't make sense to discuss here actually, wherein there are some specific parameters, and only point of putting it there is that the only difference between different classifiers are each will have different parameters. Either as an initial thing you could go over the default itself, and then once you'll get comfort, maybe shortlist a couple or 2 or 3 of them, then deep dive into the specific parameters and play around with the parameters. So now that you've built the classifier, you can actually now predict the output. So perform the prediction actually, okay, and evaluate the system. So probably at this stage, maybe we need to actually, I will actually just run you through the code still, so that instead of we can just understand what we have done till here. Yeah. So basically, what you're seeing here is an IPython notebook. So this is also a very good feature, wherein if you actually use the IPython, you could actually get a good interface wherein you can actually program as well as see the output, visualize the output as part of the browser itself. What you see here is the different blocks. So if you see the first block here, this is basically as part of any standard Python program where you're actually importing all the dependent libraries. So if you see of specific importance, you can actually see the TF-IDF vectorizer. This is very important. We're actually, of course, from sklearn, this is there. We're also talking about the specific data set which we're using is the 20 news groups. Already in Python, there is actually an available, these are all preloaded as part of the data sets. So you can actually import that, and there are certain other libraries which you import as part of this. So at the end of this, basically, you actually, you can actually now you're actually completing the import process. So once you import it, now you go to the second part of it, wherein we said what we said after now you've set the thing. Is the first step in the thing is that reading in your data and keeping the train set and test set split. So this is what we do. Again, here we are using a pre-existing library for reading the data, but this is a very simple thing. Like you just have to read from a file and place it as the output as a part of a list actually. So the end of this particular block of code, you would actually complete loading the particular relevant data into the Python library, into your code. And here actually, basically at the end of this particular section, you would actually split your thing into the training and test set. So you'll actually have ytrain and ytest would hold the labels for your training and your testing. This is the core part wherein you have now, so your ytrain, ytest holds your library, and this part is where actually you're actually vectorizing your data. So if you see, this is the TF-IDF vectorizer, and you're actually, first you initialize it. So the first step in any thing is that TF-IDF vectorizer, you're just going to initialize it. And basically, as part of initialization, you could actually set the relevant parameters for that. So we've actually set some of these parameters. And then basically you do the actual fitting. So you actually fit the vectorizer to the particular data. So in our case, this is your data which you are interested in. And just to see how it looks, we've actually just printed basically the shape of your xtrain and your xtest. Okay? So we could run. So this is the section of the code. Okay, so basically you have completed the vectorization, and here actually you complete the pre-processing, and at the end of this basically you would actually have your vectorizer, and this is your compression part of it. We have used a chi-square compression where we have actually eliminated the duplicate vectors, and this is where we actually fit the classifier, which is called the ridge, as I said, we are using the ridge classifier. We have initialized the classifier again, and then we are fitting it on the particular training and test set, which is the X train and Y train. So you are actually fitting the classifier as part of this. Okay. So, okay. So now that we have done this, the training is completed, and you actually have your CLF is actually holds your training thing, and you actually predict on the classifier, which is CLF.predict, and you actually send the test set. The text is actually a list of instances on which you want to predict. Each value in X test is actually your test, the corresponding vectorized text description. So this is your X test, and finally you would actually calculate the metrics of how well your particular data or your data did actually. Okay, so this is how your code looks. Just to relate to what we are talking in the presentation, I just wanted to show you the code how it looks. Okay, know why it's not running. Okay, in any case, we'll come back here. Okay, so this is where we were, wherein we actually trained the classifier, predicted using the trained classifier, and now we come to the important point of evaluating the system. Because as I said, it's not about just using those libraries or calls, because anybody could learn and use it, but how do you evaluate your system? It's very important. So there are certain parameters which you could use to evaluate. Again, these are not the only ones, but these are some of the most important ones, like wherein you can actually use the precision, the recall, the F-score from the from the accuracy perspective, and basically from the from the functional, from the non-functional, like the model building time, the time to predict, and the amount of training data you have. These also play a very important role in evaluating which algorithm you want to use actually. So if you actually see the metrics, I would just touch upon the recall and precision. These are very important. They are simple concepts, and once you get a hang of it, pretty much you could actually understand much of your machine learning, at least the accuracy of your classifiers actually. So basically, if I see my entire thing, that there are like two categories, which is one is the relevant classification and another is irrelevant. Just simplifying the whole thing. Now, if I say what is precision? So precision is basically if I have a set of predictions, how many of those predictions are relevant actually? So if there could be like say 20, and of that maybe 17 are correct and 3 are wrong. So actually my algorithm says 20 are correct, but actually only 17 are correct. So in that case, basically 17 by 20 is my precision actually. So basically of the predictions made, how many are correct is your precision actually. And the second basically is the recall. Of all the positive records, how many have actually been predicted? So what this means is that this is a little more harder thing in the sense that especially in your real life, once you start actually predicting, it's very difficult to measure recall because you do not know typically how much of your positive records are there in that data set. So it's a little more tricky measure, but at least in your test set you still have control, so you have some idea what is recall in your test set at least. So basically what recall is that number of relevant records predicted compared to the complete number of relevant records, so even which have not been predicted. So typically if you see, it is nothing but the precision is nothing but true positives divided by true positives plus false positives. So and recall is nothing but the true positives divided by true positives plus false negatives. So what is true positives are those which actually, just to tell what the term means, if somebody says something is positive and it is actually positive, then it is true, it's a true positive. And if something is positive but the algorithm is saying it's negative, so it's actually a false negative. So that is what is your true positive and your false negative. And your false positive is something which your algorithm says it is true and it is correct, but actually it is false. So it is actually falsely telling it is a positive. So this is your precision and recall, and your F-score is nothing but a combination of that, so that you have a single measure of your accuracy, which is nothing but the harmonic mean of the precision and recall, which is nothing but 2 times precision times recall divided by precision plus recall. So this is the metrics from the metrics perspective, and this is one of the very important measures wherein you could quickly see if your algorithm is doing good enough, is your classifier good enough or not. So now before we go to this, the next thing, so basically here what I want to stress upon is the iteration. So what I said, as I said, is that it's not a one step wherein you just fit the algorithm, something comes out and you're happy. There's a lot of effort going wherein once you get the first level of prediction, you actually understand what is happening. what is your S score, what is your precision, what is your recall, and then you will have to do a lot of work, maybe right from the drawing board. So the kind of work you could do is you could actually change the algorithm itself, wherein you're saying, okay, rich classifier doesn't work for me, let me use SVM, or let me use logistic regression, let me try different algorithms. This is one thing you could do. The second is basically you could actually go one step before that itself, wherein you're figuring out that the problem is not maybe the algorithm, but my data is not good enough. So that's when actually probably even these metrics could be run at a class level also. So certain classes might be doing well and certain classes might be pulling down your overall accuracy. So you could actually do the class-wise measures and then go specifically to those classes and do your pre-processing, which could be as I said, cleaning, or it could be random oversampling, it could be active learning, or it could be just at the end of it, if nothing works, somebody has to sit manually and validate it. Maybe that is the last call wherein automation doesn't work, but you have to make it work, so you go manually and validate the data sets. So basically you go one step before. And of course the third thing which you all could do still is that you're happy with their existing algorithms, but probably you want to tweak the different parameters. So that's when actually a more detailed understanding of what those parameters do and how it affects your output is important. And maybe you go into detail saying, okay, this parameter is affecting it this way, probably if I change this measure in a different way, probably I'll get a different output. So that is when you actually start working on the algorithm measure itself. This is from the consisting point of view. There is also this other problems like model building time, prediction time, and training data. So for example, if you have a constraint that you cannot let your model take too much time to build, right? In that case, probably certain algorithms may not work for you. Like for example, random forest, typically very compute intensive and it's going to take more time. So probably, maybe if you have a limited compute, of course in these days computer power is not such a problem, but if that is a challenge and you don't want to have enough compute power, probably certain algorithms may not work for you. Prediction time, so especially if it's a real time or a near real time system, then we have to be think that how much time does it take to predict actually. So this is also very important, and how much training data itself is available. So certain algorithms will do well with maybe less training data, or certain do with more training data. So based on that, you'll need to take a call of what works for you all. So this is actually the iteration stage. In fact, if I could say, based on our experience, probably the first cut, the system we might have built it in 6 or 7 weeks actually. But after that, the iteration is, where a lot of effort goes, and wherein you get live feedback from the different users, and then you have to actually keep on iterating to ensure that your thing keeps on performing better. Just a small touch upon large scale deployment. So how was this deployed actually? So what we actually did was, it was a horizontally scalable system. So we actually ran multiple instances of these in the different servers, and we used a load balancer in front of it. So what this meant is that if I had a more so we actually first measured at how many simultaneous requests each of these servers could actually handle. So for I think for us probably, I don't know, remember, maybe it was something like 1,000 was what it could handle actually. And with which state so what we said is, okay, if 1,000 was the thing where it started degrading the performance, we took 75% of that. So we said, okay, on average we'll go for 750 requests per server, and based on the number of requests which we need to handle, we would horizontally add more and more systems. So that is the thing we did, and of course the load balancer would take care, which is a very good thing, because certain times certain servers would go down, and the load balancer would anyway understand and probably redirect those requests to the other servers. So this way we could actually scale it out to a complete employee base. We have about 150,000 plus employees, and the system could go live for all of them. Also this could be actually work for both the intranet and internet users, so we could actually service both of them using this system. So, and of course we have to plan for redundancy also, because there were, especially initially, we faced a lot of issues wherein certain things were going down, because that was the initial stages, and we had to, the redundancy was what actually helped us going actually. So just touching upon the experience we faced basically, so this I already said, so this was the kind of different systems and functions in any organization, and basically what we could achieve using this was a single line interface where the users could type or speak their problem, and the system would automatically classify the problem to the right category. This is what we could achieve using the system actually, which we built. And what were the results of this actually? So we did see good interesting results, wherein as I said initially, we had a lot of reassignment, 3 to 4 times was the average reassignment index, and there was a 50% reduction after using the system. In under 3% months, we could make the first release deployment. And we actually did some calculations seeing because of the reassignment index going on, what kind of savings. And within 3 months, we could see 100% month of effort savings because of using the system. So it has actually got some good business benefits because of using this thing. So one more point which I touched, which I forgot to touch upon, in the building the, technical system is that though I touched upon, using a single classifier, actually in real life, typically we use an ensemble, so we don't use a single classifier. So that is something, if you want to actually build it, you might want to chain multiple classifiers together and, use the outputs together. So that is one thing which we did, and to improve the accuracy. And with that, I think we come to the conclusion actually, wherein what we felt, because of our experiences, yes, a text classifier itself has a lot of practical applications in industry, and just using, like, people typically say, okay, Python, many people say, okay, it may not be able to use for the scalability and performance, but we could see that it required scalability and performance using Python. And we felt, okay, Python was easy to learn and we could write, pretty much maintainable code. And also, if somebody is planning to start with machine learning, this could be probably a good place to start, because there's very good documentation and good support. You all could actually self-learn at your own pace. Actually, that is the advantage. So this is my contacts. If anybody is interested, any questions, you can always drop me a mail. Thank you for your time. Yes, so basically we use the sklearn library. Okay. So this was what actually, if you see here.
The reason why I'm asking is Thomson Reuters. For Reuters News, we have built our own tool called OpenCalais. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I've heard of it, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to check if you have used any open source or commercial NLP product. That is one question. The other question is, other than NLP, have you used any regular expression based classifier?
Okay. So I think for the first thing, I think OpenCalais is very good actually for named entity recognition. We did try it. Of course, right now we're not using it, but I think it's a very, very good library actually. So it really gives you a lot of, you can see a lot of good entities recognized. So it was very nice. And I think your second question was, do you use regular expressions? So in fact, we have actually done something wherein, like, for the low class classifications. So if you see there, as I said, there were like 1,500 tail classes with very less number of tickets. So we used an ensemble of automated patterns for the lower classes, and we combined it with the regular classifier for the high classes. So this is how we actually managed to actually handle the low class tickets.
I have a very basic question. When you're training the data set multiple times through iterations, how do you mentioned that some classes might be performing less well through your classifier. How do you maintain the scores while you're actually training?
Yes. So basically what we did was the precision, recall and F-score was measured at a particular class level. In fact, for some reason I'm not able to bring that program up. If I get it running, I could actually show you all the output. So I'm just trying to bring it up. But actually, just to answer your question properly, what is happening is that basically this training, right, the regular expression actually happens at a per class level. So you can actually get all these classifications at a per class. So you would actually see a clear table wherein this would actually tell you what is happening at the per class level. Okay, this is okay. I need to bring it up in this. Anyway, we can just take some more questions. If I bring it up, I'll just show it to you all. Okay, I think I'm not able to bring that thing up, but. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, please go ahead.
I have a bunch of questions. So I was wondering, what was the volume of tickets you get which prompted you to come up with such a system? Was it so high that there was no manual way to do it?
Yes, so this is very huge actually. We get a huge volume of tickets. Our volume is more than 12,000 per day. So it is very huge actually. So we have a dedicated team. So there are two problems. One is that if you see that, the kind of tickets are across different domains. So there's no one person who can handle it. That's the first problem. The second is the load itself is 12,000. So 12,000 itself is a huge load. Assuming that I can, take at least 5 minutes to handle each ticket, you can imagine the team size which is actually just manually reading it and reassigning those tickets. So these were the two main reasons and driver for actually, developing the system.
And did you see if there was something already available in the market before you developed the system, or do you have something very specific to your company that you had to?
So this was a particular problem.
Yeah.
See, if you see classification as such, it's there for quite some time. This was a specific problem we faced in our company, wherein, as I said, right, we're having this, people are like, there are two things. One is the end user is very frustrated because he's forced to wait for the resolution to happen, and the second is the agents also are getting unnecessarily overloaded because they are getting tickets which don't belong to them. So these are two things which are actually things. So the driver behind this was to improve the, the end user's experience, and the second is also to reduce, the effort, what I would say is a duplicate effort, wherein the agent is only sitting and reassigning tickets, a thing which could be done, automatically. So these were the two main drivers for us to actually look and seeing the size of our company, which is like as I said, it's 1,50,000. It's a huge company, geographically spread, and the kind of issues are also, different kinds of issues, different, different functions which don't talk to each other. So we have all the problems of a large organization. So such a system really helped actually overcome those issues.
Do you have some numbers as to how much time it takes now to put a ticket into the right?
Yeah, so as I said, the reassignment index. So actually, if you see the average hops before was something like 3. Now actually we're bringing down to 1.5. So I'm not saying it's perfect yet. There are still, actually we're still dealing with the accuracy issues, but it has actually got a 50% reduction in the reassignment index.
And I had a last question. So you mentioned that you run this as multiple instances on different servers.
Yes.
So how do you sort of integrate the learning that each of the server has? Like, do you maintain a database to find out what is going on?
Yeah, so the kind of what we do is that the learning actually is that what happens is all these things, actually the tickets, right? The entire learning happens on the ticket database, wherein when a ticket is assigned a category, right? So the user selects a category and the closure category, right? When it is same, then we know that everything is fine. When there is a difference, we know that something has gone wrong because the system has predicted class A, but the ticket has been closed in class C. So wherever there is a difference, we are actually feeding back that into the system, saying that okay, this has been wrongly categorized. Especially, it's a learning for your closure category class. So this is how we actually do the learning loop back.
Hi, I had a question. All this depends on your availability of data. Say, suppose it's a new problem or I do not have any data available. How do I go about solving that?
See, there are two things. If it is no data, then classification is not an issue. The second could be that you have data, but you don't know which classes belongs to. That is a more, that actually falls into the space wherein, you have data, but you don't know which classes. Then you could use first an initial unsupervised technique. You use a clustering. And then, probably maybe you have, say, I don't know, just say 10,000 instances, right? But you don't know exactly what it is. So you could actually run a clustering, and the clustering would actually tell you where, what are the different buckets. Then you actually have a semi-supervised approach where you actually manually go through those clusters and see if it makes sense. There could be a possibility that these clusters still don't make sense. Some manual curation is required. You can manually label it and then build a classifier using this relabeled data. That is how you would start. But if you don't have data, then classification is not a problem for you. So probably you don't even have to come here. But if you have data and you don't have classes, you could still use an unsupervised approach.
And also you built a tool, right? So what else did you integrate with it to get the whole thing running?
Okay, so basically the back end was complete Python. The front end basically is omni-channel. Basically we have a mobile, we have a browser. So you actually have the browser .NET code in the browser, and then I think the mobile is, if I'm not wrong, I think it's like Java or I don't know. So there are different, we have different front ends which are all talking to the back end, and it's omni-channel actually.
And only Python for the servers?
At the back end it was purely Python. We want to use Java libraries, but then that has not yet happened, like to improve the accuracy.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question.
Yep.
So all your data is stored in RDBMS systems itself? It's
No, we are using not RDBMS, we are using MongoDB. So,
but structure?
Yeah, we are using the data, the training data is stored in a MongoDB.
MongoDB.
Yeah.
And you told 12,000 tickets come on a daily basis. So how much was your training data set that you used?
So we have, training data was never a problem. So we have huge corpus. We could actually go back to how many months. So in fact, we actually started with, I think, 500,000 tickets. And if you want, we can go more. We just have to go more months back. So the training is not a problem. The problem is that the data is not trustworthy. That is the bigger challenge. Like, how do I actually ensure that the data is good enough to be used? That is where our challenge is actually.
So data preparation was a huge...
Data is where we have to put more effort, and it's still actually an open thing, like where a lot of work is still have to go on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think it's a good question, but at least we didn't face it. Probably, if you see some of these papers, like, massively scalable. So ours was, even with this large data, it's not in that massively scalable, space. But we didn't face any issues in our thing. And we just used a very small, if you see, it's just an 8 GB machine. It's a standard desktop which we use for all our predictions and, learning. So that way, I think there's still scope that, we could potentially scale out to a much larger thing. So I don't see that, that is a big issue. There is also something called batch training. So if assuming I have even more training data and my memory is not good enough to hold the entire training set in one shot, I could always use the batch training mode, wherein I could actually, say, train batches of, maybe 1,000 or 1,500, and I could go and, train it to infinite amount. So that facility is also there as part of the library.
Hi, I would like to know how frequently do you build your model? Because as and when the data keeps coming, your model also should evolve. So how frequently do you build your model?
Right. So there are two parts to that. Okay. One is that, the learning part of it, wherein can we actually learn automatically from, as I said, the closure class and the class in which it was initially categorized. Can we learn from this? Our aim, our idea was that we automatically take this and build this on a daily basis. This is what our aim is. But this is not what's happening practically, because the issue is that many times the closure class is also not trustworthy. So we are still going through a process wherein the agents itself are now still getting trained, wherein they are actually saying that if you see a ticket in the wrong class, it's your duty to close it to the right class. So today what is happening is, many people are doing it well, but there are at least 50% of people who are not, bothered. Even if it's like, maybe it's as I said, a facilitation and they're closing in payroll, they just still do it. So we are actually going through a training process. It's more about a people issue. And once we're confident of that, then the automatic training could happen on a daily basis in a nightly build. That is the aim.
Okay. Another question is, what other features have you considered apart from TF-IDF? Is there any other attributes you have taken into account?
Right. So as for this, we actually used only TF-IDF. Of course, we used the compression chi-square thing, wherein we brought that sparsiness to reduce the sparsiness. Other than that, for this particular model, we did not use anything else actually.
Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, so thank you, Aarti. It was a very well-timed session and a very interactive one. This is a small token of appreciation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Our next session starts at 11:30.